Hello, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns and Creatures series of comedy, fantasy novels, and short stories. With me today is Sam West, and we are going to be talking about the spell Blindness/Deafness. All right, it's a pretty straightforward one. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, this is a spell that a ton of characters get access to. It's on a billion subclasses. It's also a bard, cleric, sorcerer, wizard spell just out the gate. So there are a lot of people that are going to have options to take it. It is odd. And I think it's odd because it is very situational on both ends. I think one condition is way better than the other. That being said, there are some niche things you can do with this and also some fairly decent things you can do with this. It's relatively cheap. This is the kind of thing I think it's another one of those second level spells that are going to get better the higher level you get, and not be that amazing out the gate.
What about all right, we got blindness. There's blindness or deafness, right? You don't do both. Right. Now, I'm pretty familiar with how blindness works, but what does deafness, what disadvantages does that give you?
Almost none. So the blinding condition is a blinding creature automatically fails ability checks that require sight, and attack rolls against them have advantage, and their attack rolls have disadvantage. That's what blindness is. Deafness simply says a deafened creature can't hear and automatically fails any checks that require them to hear.
Yeah, I guess that's not really devastating as far as game mechanics go. I guess there are situations where that could be a disadvantage, but I can think of more advantages, not being able to hear a harpy's song or something.
Yeah, I think that's where deafness is more going to be used for its niche cases like that, and then it's going to be used for its practical applications of deafening someone so you can sneak in somewhere. Just because whenever, if you deafen a creature and that creature becomes aware that they no longer hear anything, they're probably going to freak out a little bit, and that's going to alert them to something fishy going on. Not necessarily your ideal infiltration technique, right?
No.
Alternatively, and that's kind of the best case scenario deafness typically has. I wish deafness affected spellcasting in some way, especially if there are spells that required verbal components. Make that an interesting way to make the deafened condition a little bit better, but it's not what's written, so that's not what we got. Yeah. Blindness, alternatively, is going to be a lot more useful and is going to be a lot more upside, whereas against enemies, and you're very rarely going to cast on yourself, but they're going to be kind of those odd situations again, really going against the Medusa. Why risk accidentally opening your eyes? I mean, it won't happen anyway. If you say I keep my character's eyes shut, they keep their eyes shut. But you can hypothetically, if you don't trust the scaredy NPC that just joined with the group and he's tempted to look into the eyes of Medusa, you can physically blind him with the spell. Be like, no, you will not look at this Medusa. I will keep you from turning to stone. That's a thing, a niche case with it, but it's going to be less common than niche cases for deafness, I think.
All right. Well, I mean, yeah, that's the positive niches, but go on. When would you use the? I can't see using deafness much against an enemy at all. If you've got anything, spit it out. But otherwise, let's use some blindness.
Literally nothing jumps to mind for deafness. Yeah. It just seems bad. Blindness is it's the combat one, right? It's the one that you do against creatures that you're trying to punch to death, and it's decent at that. It's not as good as Hold Person, but it affects more creatures. It's probably worse than Tasha's Hideous Laughter, or just Hideous Laughter, I think is what they renamed it to recently. In most circumstances, Hideous Laughter makes them prone, which gives advantage on melee attack rolls, but disadvantage on ranged attack rolls, so there's that little mitigating factor. Blindness also makes their attack rolls bad, though, so I don't know. Tasha's incapacitates the creature, which is definitely better than just blinding it, but again, blinding it, you have some amount of upside of everything. It's advantage attack rolls. It has disadvantage on all attack rolls. So it's kind of incapacitated, just worse. It's middling when compared to a lower level spell, which is why I'm not in love with it out the gate. Again, it does affect more creatures, though. I think Tasha's only affects, and I think Tasha's can affect any kind of creature, or Hideous Laughter, I mean, yeah. But at the same time, where the spell gets a lot better than just blinding creature to hit it, blinding creature to navigate an environment is fine. They can't see where you're going and you're very quiet. It's somewhat useful. There are going to be some out of combat utility for this at second level. This, again, though, isn't really a spell I envision a lot of times wanting to use at third level. I would much rather use this at higher levels, specifically because I actually think this spell scales quite well. This
Okay.
is a spell that for every spell slot higher, you get an extra creature. So blinding 2 things for a 3rd level slot all of a sudden becomes substantially better, because you're imposing disadvantage on 2 different things, and you can team up on one of them with advantage on those attack rolls, and you're only spending a 3rd level slot to do it. That is also flexibly a 2nd level slot. So you have some more flexible casting in here. As you get into the higher levels, as you're finding you have more 3rd level slots open for use, as you have more 2nd level slots that you're not using that often, having blindness, deafness comfortably on hand is going to mix those. It's going to cover those niche circumstances when you want them to. It's going to cover the sirens. It's going to cover weird sonic damage. It's going to cover situations where you're going to need or want to blind long distance creatures. It doesn't only ever into 30 feet, but like you can still try to get things having a hard time seeing you from a distance.
Mm-hmm.
It also is going to let you not feel bad when you cast it at the 4th level slot to blind 3 things. Even if 2 of them pass, you still get something out of the deal, which makes the Saber Die scale quite well, as far as the spell will do consistently more things the higher level you cast it, which I'm a fan of. It isn't amazing, but it is useful in its flexibility. So as far as like a flexible option to have on hand, I think Blindness Deafness is something you're happy to pick up around 7th, 8th level.
All right, let's talk about a little bit about blindness versus heavy obscurity.
Okay.
I mean,
So
I think I get it. You know, obscurity is essentially blinding both parties.
Yeah, whatever is obscured is heavily blinded, right?
Right.
I'm sorry, whatever is heavily obscured, functionally, it suffers from the blinded condition. The literal rules do say a creature effectively suffers from the blinded condition when trying to see something in a heavily obscured area. That's just the rules. So it's not technically blinded, but it's functionally blinded.
Yes.
Blindness itself is way better because it only affects the creature. If you're dealing with heavily obscured areas, you're typically dealing with like heavy fogs and stuff that you want to maybe dissipate to get advantages on, or you maybe are dealing with blind fighting a little bit better. I actually think heavily obscured is probably a little bit more interesting in that it cares about more interactive things. It cares about more niche conditions. But blinding on its own, it's a condition. You have an action for a condition. The condition is something that happens in other environments. The condition is something that's going to not necessarily always be super useful, but it's going to be something you don't hate to have on hand. So yeah, the heavily obscuring uses the blind condition functionally, and blindness deafness imposes blindness one-sided versus many-sided. Like if we're looking at something like Sleet Storm, or not Sleet, yeah, Sleet Storm, that's the heavily obscured area. Yeah. They're going to affect different kinds of encounters. They're going to be used in different situations. Because again, one is everyone's blind, and one is just the target is blind, or just the 2 or 3 or 4 targets.
Right. Yeah, you got anything else to say?
This is such a mediocre spell, is what I'll say. And I think that because I think I'm just a little bit jaded on it because I've seen it on so many character sheets, and it's fine on most of them. It taking an action and only being 30-foot range is kind of whatever. It only being a verbal component is actually kind of neat because you can use it in odd situations. Like when you're the whole group's tied up prisoners, and you can just yell at somebody to blind them and then cause a scene and try and break out and do some nonsense, right? That'll have that slight niche upside. Rarely will come up. It's a series of niche outcomes that get slightly better as you scale with level. That's probably where I'll end on this. This is something that, like, unlike Rave of Enfeeblement, which I think gets substantially better as the game goes on, this is just kind of fine as the game goes on, and it'll be a neat thing to have access to. You never want to cast this at 3rd level, more or less, because just one potential blind is definitely worse than Tasha's Hideous Laughter. It's definitely worse than a Hold Person. It's going to be a lot worse than a lot of the other things you can do at that level. But again, because it gets more flexible as you upcast it, as you get a higher and higher level, being able to do something moderately useful with your lower level slots is handy. It's fine.
Yeah, I like it. It's just doesn't have a lot to talk about though.
It's the blinded condition. That's what it is.
Or the deafened condition. Very rare.
Those are rare instances where you want the deafened condition. Yeah.
All right. Well, Sam score. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. 3 out of 5.
It's a 3 out of 5, right down the middle.
That sounds about right.
It's fine. Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Sam. And that's Blindness Deafness. We'll see you later.
Mostly blindness, though.
Yeah, mostly blind. Bye. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it, A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description where you'll find my Caverns and Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, our full review of the spell, and other fun things.